I was looking around during some of the early parts of the service, noting who was sitting here, and that some of the biblical names have stood the test of time. We have in the room today an Elizabeth, a Mary, a Eunice, and Lois is at home watching on television. We've got Dan, Paul, Timothy. Some of the names we've even got a Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But as long as I've lived, I have never met face to face a Jezebel. Now, I've heard women called a Jezebel. It was never flattering. That man is married. I can't believe he goes to lunch as often as he does with that Jezebel. I wouldn't trust that Jezebel as far as I could throw her. It's never flattering. I looked it up. It's in the dictionary. A Jezebel is a woman who is impudent, shameless, or morally unrestrained. The reason I've never known a woman named Jezebel was because there was a woman named Jezebel who was impudent, shameless, and morally unrestrained, and after her, nobody was going to name their darling little baby that name again. It's in none of the complete book of baby names at the store. She was a Phoenician woman who managed to manipulate her seductions into the inner circle of the king of Israel, eventually became his bride, and then King Ahab had a mess on his hands. King Ahab's father, King Omri, had done good work as king of the northern kingdom. He'd brought power, prosperity to the region. But now his son Ahab has married Jezebel, and she is a Jezebel. First of all, as a Phoenician, she's the worshiper of the Baal gods. So she requires Ahab to make her religion the national religion of Israel. You know how it goes. You get married. First, she takes down the Aerosmith poster from the bedroom wall. Then she tosses out your plastic cup collection from sporting events. Next thing you know, she's requiring that her religion become the national religion of Israel. You don't get to keep anything. Make no mistake. Jezebel has moved into the palace, and she intends for Ahab and all the rest of Israel to do exactly as she demands. She saw land she liked. She'd just have the owner killed. She'd take it. She's queen, after all. You can do that. And you will worship what she worships, and she worships Baal, and that's her law. In fact, she had a few of the Jewish prophets killed just to make a little room. So as you might imagine, temple Sabbath attendance was not at its high point. Baalism is a fairly characteristic form of a primitive religion in the Near East at that time. At its core, it's about pursuing comfort and survival, resigning to life as it is. Life is circular. Seasons come and go and start over. Life is just round and round, so you just get by. The main goal of the Baal religion is security and comfort. Just get by. Softer blankets and more grain in the silo. Security and comfort. That's all there is to live for. Can you imagine anything more primitive than people worshiping security and comfort? I think I might have passed about a dozen Baal temples on my way in today. Now, Ahab, who is an Israelite, he and most of Israel are living in this spiritual schizophrenia. How do you worship Yahweh and Baal at the same time? The king is Jewish. The queen is a Baal worshiper. What should I do as a citizen? Should I go by and offer up a sacrifice to Baal on my way to Sabbath? What do I do? Well, you've probably guessed that in this context, the community of Hebrew prophets has grown considerably smaller. But there's one prophet who is staring this madness right in the teeth. It's a resident of the northern kingdom named Elijah. And in his graphic way, Elijah described this Judaism-Baalism tension by saying it's limping with two different opinions. You can't serve both. It's on this leg for a while and on this leg for a while, and you just can't live that way. You will set your compass to a true north. There is one true God. You will live in devotion to the one true God, or you will fritter your life away, buying better sheets and upgrading your toaster because Kathy has a toaster you like. Baalism is a religion of ease. But the religion of Yahweh requires devotion and challenge and growth and maturity and purpose, and you can't have it both ways. And so, with grit and leadership, Elijah is calling the community of Hebrew people back to their one true devotion, back to living a life that actually matters and stands for something. And he's got a steel spine. There's one scene where Elijah is walking along the road and actually encounters the king. And the king is the one who recognizes Elijah and says, "Is it you, the troubler of Israel?" Scary stuff. The king looks at the agitator to his policies and says, "Hey, there's the troublemaker." But Elijah straightens up and says, "I've not troubled Israel, but you have, and your father's house, because you have forsaken the commandments of the Lord and followed the Baals." That's gutsy stuff to say to the king. As you might imagine, he was a hero to his community of prophets. He lived with purpose and conviction, and he kept calling the next generation forward to live, to be faithful to God. The winds of culture are fickle. Queens come and go. This queen, that queen. And the temptation to give burnt offerings to the gods of comfort and ease and security will always be there, because who doesn't want to worship their own delight and comfort? It's easy, it's empty to just worship what tickles. And so Elijah calls people back to God, to their right devotion, because he knows that when comfort and ease are your life goals, everything will end poorly. Rabbi Harold Kushner writes about his experience with people at the end of life. And his experience as a clergy person and mine are actually quite similar. He writes about the privilege we have of standing with people in the last moments of their lives. And what he writes that might surprise many of you is that most people are actually not afraid to die. Folks think that right at the end, most people would be afraid of death, but in most cases that's not true. There's some people who've lived long, satisfying lives, and they just recognize it for what it is. And there's some people who are in so much agony they see death as a release. But he does note that the people who have the most trouble with death are those who feel like they have never done anything worthwhile with their lives. That if God would only give them 2 or 3 more years, maybe they could go back at it, maybe they could get it right. And that's the result of Baal worship. It always ends in an empty sadness. But there are those who, like Elijah, have figured out that a life of meaning begins with a clear, focused attention on loving and serving the holy God of Israel. Some of you in this room modeled that for me. You show the rest of us what it's like to live in simplicity, in relationship, community, with a singular focus on the things that endure, the things that really do matter. And a big part of our mission as a church is to tell the good news to the city of Atlanta who think that Baal worship is going to satisfy the hunger in their heart, that it's a lie. Finally, were you wondering when I was going to get to the story? Finally, we get to today's story. It's the last episode of Elijah's earthly contribution. It has all the drama of a final scene. Elijah's walking along with one of the younger prophets named Elisha. I've already once switched their names in the sermon. I think they're close just to confuse preachers, but I'll try not to do it again. We're told from the very first line of this story that it's the final one. Now, when the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven by a whirlwind, we know that this is the dramatic end. And 3 times Elijah tells the younger prophet to stay back, that he wants to go into the mystery by himself. But the devoted Elisha says, after every stay here, he says, I will not leave you. And so when they get to the edge of the Jordan River, Elijah takes off his mantle. It's the cloak that, you know, when people dress up for a scene at church, a biblical scene, and they wear the robe and then that little sleeveless one over the top, that's what it is. That's what a mantle is, a sleeveless outer garment. But it was also for the prophets. It was a symbol that they were a prophet. If you saw somebody with one of those on, you say, hey, there's a prophet. Kind of like an ancient lapel pin. It kind of set them apart. Anyway, he takes his sleeveless outer garment off, rolls it up tight, strikes the water parts. It's reminiscent of the Moses story. He and Elijah walk on dry land to the other side. And on the other side, Elijah says to Elisha, tell me what I can do for you before I'm taken up. And in an amazing act of devotion, Elisha says, please let me inherit a double portion of your spirit. He doesn't ask for the lake house or the Lexus. I want to be the blessing to other people that you've been. I want to live with the kind of clarity and purpose that you live. I want my life to have meaning, and if I could just have a double portion of whatever it is that is animating your life, that is what I most want in the world. And Elijah says, you've asked a hard thing. Yet if you see me as I'm being taken from you, it'll be granted. If not, it won't. They continue walking, chatting, and then a chariot of fire, horses of fire separate the two of them. Elijah ascends in a whirlwind into heaven, this scene of power and weeping, glory and renting, and when the storm and the fire cease, Elisha has now inherited the blessing and the burden of wearing the mantle. He's now the faith leader of the people of Yahweh. And that same story has played out less dramatically throughout the history of the faith. The older saints of God, after some years, age out of their era of leadership. After making their profound impact, after standing strong in a wishy-washy culture, after bearing witness to God's love and grace, they become the venerated. They become the ones we love and admire, the ones we want to walk with and hear the stories from. And the faith continues to be told, the faith story continues to be told because some younger leaders emerge and take the blessing and burden of wearing the mantle. They're afraid but not too afraid to lead in the next chapter of the faith history. And so I'm celebrating today that this church is so rich with Elijah leaders. We have a group in this room, a group of super seniors who really are my heroes. I hear the stories, not just the stories of their formal leadership in this church, but the quiet acts of service and love that they have done over and over and over. The things that are motivated by nothing but their goodness. If I had a magic wand, I would turn all of our 85-year-old leaders back into 45-year-old leaders so I could do church under their leadership again. But that's not how it works. Elijah eventually crosses the Jordan in every congregation. And Elisha does or does not step up. So I have a challenge for both of you today, Elijah and Elisha. Elijah, those of you who are in the twilight years of your life, what contributions do you still need to make in this last chapter so that your life will matter the most? You remember Rabbi Kushner said that too many people on their deathbed wish they had 2 or 3 more years so they could get it right. What do you need to do to get it right? What do you need to do for your family, your church, your legacy to close with no regrets at all? And Elisha, the younger ones, are you up to it? These older saints need you to take the mantle, and it's time for some of you to step up into your area of engagement and service and leadership. And what does that look like for you? What one part of this church's mission gets you excited enough to want to raise your hand and say, I'll do it? Because the mantle is before you, and for us to move forward, somebody has to pick it up. Would you consider your response to that? Would you consider saying yes to the Christ who does animate the life of my heroes? Would you consider locking your life inside the community and covenant of this church, bringing your membership here to bear witness to Christ's love with us? However you feel God leading, respond as we stand and sing.